going up. Elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, a podcast that explores concepts from Bowen family systems theory in brief and clear ways. Today, we are thinking about differentiation of self and what this looks like in one's own family. Joining Katie and I for a second time is Dr. Mariana Martinez. Mariana is a clinical psychologist and an expert in Bowen theory, which she has applied in her teaching, clinical practice, and leadership roles. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology and joined the Bowen Center in 2008 and became a member of faculty in 2012. There, she directed the family clinic for 6 years, hosted the TV show Family Matters, which is an excellent resource on Bowen theory that can now be found on YouTube. And Mariana founded the Ibero-American Institute, which promotes Bowen theory in Spanish-speaking countries, and also serves as the executive director for Family Wealth and Culture Services at Wells Fargo Bank. Mariana lives in Maryland currently and is originally from Mexico. So thank you so much for being here again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So last season, we did 2 episodes on the concept of differentiation of self, and I will link those in the show notes. They do a pretty decent job of getting a basic overview of the concept. But today we're going to focus on how work in one's own family contributes to the effort of differentiating a self. So Mariana, would you go first with what this is all about?
Well, I think that working on one's own family differentiation of self has to do with this. When we think about the future generations, most of us, most parents, at least that I've worked with, want to leave something of value to their children, something behind. I do, I know I do. But the most valuable thing that I can inherit is more emotional maturity. So that is the key, in my experience, to a more fulfilling, productive, responsible, stable life. That's what I want to leave behind to my children. But how to pass down emotional maturity? The only avenue is to be more mature myself. The only avenue. And that is differentiation of self. There's no other way than to show up in my own family, relate to as many people in my family as I can, know them and have them know me. And as I do that, I be able to connect without losing myself in the relationship and becoming what they want me to be or what I want them to be for me. And that is working on differentiation of self. And for me, it's the only way to attain emotional maturity. That's why I think it's so important to consider it as the key in this process.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, to echo some of that, I would see working on self and one's own family as the core of the theory. And exactly what Mariana just said, to see the work in yourself as being a resource for better functioning in the individual and a resource as better adaptation for future generations. I think this idea is the action part of the theory. You know, I think sometimes Bowen theory can be thought of as a intellectual experiment, but I think the work on differentiation of self in one's own family is that action part. It's not just thinking about these ideas or observing them, but, you know, really getting in your family and doing the work. And, you know, I used to have a supervisor who used to say to me, you know, if you can make it with your mother, you can make it anywhere. But this idea of, you know, the work done in our families of origin, really, I see it for myself and my clients as it echoes in all the other contexts we live in. So I think this is the idea of where this theory goes into an action phase. Dixie, what do you got?
Well, mine will highlight the action and my inability to do it well. So here's what I have. My overly simplistic way of describing differentiation of self is It's one's capacity to distinguish thoughtful thoughts from anxious thoughts, and a person's ability to be oneself while breathing the same air as others. So when I think of my family, which is the water that I've swam in for 45 years, who I am and what I do in my family is so habitual and well practiced, it's hard to begin to parse out those two things above. It's pretty challenging just to have the presence of mind to observe myself, but thinking about when it might be helpful to do something different or growing up a bit can seem about as hard as learning to write with my non-dominant hand, especially if my family wants me to stay right-handed. So, I don't know, that seems maybe a little dramatic, but I wanted to speak to the challenge of it in the family because it's so, I mean, it's just, yeah, so habitual. So for Dr. Bowen's pitch, I will say I have a full page of quotations, but I will try to summarize. He, chapter 21, he talks about a differentiating effort in his own family, and he says he achieved a major breakthrough in differentiating himself in his family of origin, preceded by a 12-year effort to understand his family, an active effort to modify myself in a relationship to my family for 7 or 8 years, and that this was a slow trial and error effort intertwined with his learning and professional work. So that's number one. I just thought, man, that is a lot of years of thinking and working. He talked about, in that effort, my overall goal was to be able to have an entire visit with the family without becoming fused into the emotional system. And he speaks about losing objectivity when he entered the space, and that objectivity would usually return within an hour or two after the visit while en route home. He also said his immediate goal was to avoid defending anything or attacking any issues, to avoid getting angry, even with provocation, and to have an instant casual response to any comment. Other places he talks about the process of differentiating a self from a parental family has 2 steps, which I think is this person-to-person relationship, and then working on triangles, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, there's the classic description of when we do make efforts towards differentiation, there are 3 predictable steps in the family reaction to these moves. They are, you are wrong, change back, and if you do not, these are the consequences. So he highlights that any sort of differentiation is for self alone. It's not to, change others. And then he comments about how when he brought this to his work and presented it to other therapists, that when they started this work in their families, it shifted their ability, their work, and their own clinical work. So, okay, there we go.
I'm glad you touched on that very last point. I mean, all what you said is very rich. But when you asked me about what would be the concept that you wanted to talk about, I chose differentiation of self in one's own family, like that effort, because I know that part of the audience for us today are clinicians or people that want to apply theory in their professional life. And I'm very familiar with that effort of studying and learning, and I'm part of the Bowen Center where we have all sorts of programs to quote unquote train people. But if there is not a component of personal work, then it sort of lies flat, or it just doesn't work. There are 3 things that seem to be important to really understand theory. One is, of course, studying and learn it and read, etc. Second is do some research on it and try to learn something new yourself. And the third, I would say the most important one, is differentiation of self in your own life. Otherwise, you really never understand what this is about. They're ideas, and you cannot grasp the depth of the concepts and appreciate the difficulty of the process. So here we are asking clients to do things or consider things or think in ways, and if we cannot do it in our own lives, then it's very difficult to relate to the other person's efforts.
Yeah. I appreciate that one. You got to put yourself in the same context. And I think it does make you show up. So I watch it show up so much different in the clinical space. And the other part that I really appreciate that you named there, Dixie, is the long effort. I think the way that I watch all these concepts being interconnected is obviously where someone starts this journey with their level of differentiation, where we might each fall on the scale based on the cards we were dealt, like Bowen said, right? The family that you enter into is going to have a level of differentiation. So all of our journeys will be so different as we begin to do our work on our own family. But for me and my own journey, it's been so interesting to watch this long-term effort, how where I don't want to work, where I do get interested and curious, but what I avoid, and how each step along my journey opens up just new awareness. And what I've been really interested and wanted to say in this podcast is I get interested in, not only does it make me see new things in my family, but I've been so interested to the new questions and thinking that is available with the families I consult with. So I might do some different thing in my family of origin, do some work on myself. And then the next time I sit down with a family, I have different curiosities. I have different ways that I'm looking at their system. And I just get so interested in that connection that I wouldn't have predicted. I read the text, I saw the things, I heard the stories, but to see it in action, to be able to see how my work on my own family does mean I show up differently in my clinical office. I also work in an organization managing, as in a role of leadership, how this work does translate into the other spaces. I just think that is really cool. I just find that really interesting to watch. And it's why I think that this is the action. This is the important part, like Mariana named, kind of the most important element of working on differentiation of self. Yeah.
People have examples?
Well, I started my part of the presentation talking about the next generation and what I want to leave behind. So that might be a motivator. Others are to heal oneself. If you have problems, you're sick or whatever, you might use these efforts to do something about it, right? But so for me, one of the big motivators is the next generation, and but again, it always goes back to self, right? So if I want to do something for them, I have to do it for myself. There's so much about parenting these days, and about what's the best way to parent, and what you should do and not do, and say, don't say, different approaches, and it just changes depending on the week that you read those newspapers, right? But really, the work, as far as I'm concerned, has to do with the person of the parent. So that's where the differentiation of self comes, as a personal effort, and then everything flows from there. So my example is that in the efforts that I have done with my own mother, have really had a positive effect in the relationship with my daughter in this example. So when I'm with my mother, I'm very easy, and I find it very easy to please her, to do things for her. If she's sitting there and she needs her glasses, Mom, don't worry, I'll go get them. I don't even sit and think and ponder, does she need me to go, or she wants to go, or did she ever ask, even ask? Or so I do it very, very quickly. Of course, that also reflects in the way that I relate to my daughter. I'm very quick at solving her problems, giving ideas, doing for her, and all those things. So as I have worked with my mother, the relationship with my daughter has shifted. Not that I did an effort there necessarily, but I did it with my mother, and then it just became some sort of second nature to me, to be more paused in responding to what I think is a need of my mother. I want her happy. Of course, I want her happy. But so what do I do to attain that? And do I lose self in the process? So in that effort, all of a sudden I see that I can sit with my daughter and ask different questions. I can sit with her and not recommend how she should lead her life. We are more relaxed with each other, just as the relationship with my mother has relaxed with those efforts. So my point here is that what I do for myself to be more of a self with somebody important for me, which is my mother, has yield results with other relationships, because we know that the queen of the triangles is, or the king of the triangles is, with one's own parents. So that's where a very important work of this process of differentiation occurs.
I have one where I was thinking I would bring up this idea that Mariana just nicely talked about it, where I think science is beginning to really support how the regulation through relationship, if we can change the way we're managing our own nervous system in contact with another person, how that has a cascading effect on future generations. So I just thought, Dixie, if people are interested, I could pop in some resources on thinking about that from a science perspective. And then I thought my daughter will often ask me the question, if you had a superpower, what would your superpower be? And so my maybe a little more silly example is one of the ones I say, well, I think time travel would be fun. I think to be able to move to different times. So I thought I would give people just to taking it out of the seriousness and think about the Back to the Future franchise as my example here, about thinking about this work in your own family. Like, he had this advantage of going back in time and being able to observe the functioning of his parents before he was born. And to use that as a resource, I mean, true, you can get into the movie and the context and thinking about how he changes that, to use that as a resource to think about who he is in the world, like how these two parents and the choices that they made, and how there's different choices, how they manage themselves differently in a context with a bully, or how they define themselves in a relationship differently, using Bowen terms that the movie isn't using, but just this ability to think about how a movie talked about how this can change, the way you function in a relationship, knowing more about the way your parents functioned, what stressors they were up against, how they came into the world, how that makes a difference. And, we can't be the future travelers as of yet, but, I think the projection into that can impact his future self. So as he learns about his own functioning and what his parents might have been sensitive to, how does that change his own reactivity? I think there's this problem he's up against where he's always challenged if people call him out for being a chicken, and how he learns to regulate his function differently by seeing himself in the future. And I guess my challenge and tying this concept into this movie, if you've traveled with me this far, maybe I'm confusing you, it is, how does his journey of learning about his own parents give him insight into some reactivity he might have had in the future that he could have thought through without traveling to the future? So there's if you've went along this journey, I thought I wanted to try on a movie. And I just think that interest in the past and learning the people that our parents are and the people that they were and how they came together in a relationship and how they interact with us, I think that's all a piece of this work in one's own family. So that was my attempt. Back to the Future.
Well, in my example was I have many generations of musical people in my family, great grandparents, and all the way to my daughter's graduating with a jazz music degree this year. And when I was born, so I'm the youngest with older brothers, our family sang, and I think maybe Johnny Cash is the most famous person for this, but that old song, Daddy sang bass, Mama sang tenor, me and little brother will join right in there. I'm not sure if you guys know it, but you guys don't know it. Hopefully some people will know it. It's pretty classic country song. So those are the lyrics for the chorus. And then because I came along and didn't fit with how it's originally written, my little line was, then little sister came along and she joined them in the song. And so I was thinking about, and especially with music, people you play together, right? You each have your part, but you're producing something together. And I thought it highlights the different parts that we have and the automatic ways that we move together. And when does my family make beautiful music, in whether it's music or in life? And then how do I think about where could some be made. Or maybe I don't want to sing tenor anymore. Or maybe something's happened and dad's no longer around to sing bass and there's shifts in the family. And what goes into observing that and then thinking through, can a new song be played? And some families will have more flexibility in, no, you must stay with the part you have always had. And other families will be like, sure, let's mix it up. Let's do a jazz odyssey together. But so maybe it's a little bit of a metaphor, but also actually how, when you see how intense I get when there are 4 of us in the room and there's not at least 3-part harmony, there's some reactivity around music too, and some expectations.
We could watch the song and know what's happening.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what else is stirred as we think through these examples. What do they highlight?
I think that there's a very tricky part of trying to differentiate oneself, because a lot of the things that we can do in the name of differentiation are exactly the opposite. And it also depends on the context, on how your emotional experience in the moment, how others are reacting, how you're thinking about it. So it isn't as easy as it sounds, because this is not a technique. It's a way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get there, Dr. Kerr propose that there's this equation that is emotional objectivity plus action equals differentiation of self. So these two things have to happen. And emotional objectivity is one that is hard, because you need to really be thinking systems and appreciate how these relationships are moving, how you are reacting, what's happening within you, which of your two systems, the emotional or the intellectual system, is taking the lead, and all that at the same time, in real time, in the moment, while you're facing the anxiety. So you need to be able to look at this in a very demanding situation, and that's where you reach some objectivity. Sometimes you're in it and you forget about everything else. You go out and say, oh, this is what happened. Well, that's a good step. But to be able to do it in the moment, it represents behavior that is different. Then that is differentiation, emotional objectivity, and the action in the moment, in the face of the tension and the anxiety. So I think that we can do that very few times in life, but that's worth the effort. and it makes a difference, because differentiation of self brings others with you in a way. When you really take a step forward, then others are attracted to that, and they come with you, and they do their own efforts. So again, what I started is just focus on self, because you don't have to do anything else. The rest happens by virtue of the system accommodating to this new exaggerated new person you are, and so that brings a little more maturity to the whole group. So it is tricky, because you cannot just plan it and say, okay, now I'm gonna state that I'm gonna do this, and all those things.
Yeah.
I copied a quote that I think I was wondering, I always get interested if Dixie's going to take some of the ones I'm thinking about from Dr. Kerr, that I think, really punches up this idea that Mariana just talked about the looking at the system. It says, being able to observe our family as a system is essential for working to increase our level of self. Being more of a self depends on seeing more clearly the ways in which I am not being a self and its interplay with others who are having the same problems. I like it when people can say things concisely and more clearly than I can. And I just think, one of my hardest things that I am up against when I work on myself and my own family is that constant discipline to see the system. I just think that real reminder that I can get real focused and zoomed in on me and one relationship, and just the benefit I found from stepping back and trying to be interested in if I'm having some strong feelings in this relationship, what's going on in the other triangles around the system. So just that disciplined effort to think about my system as its emotional interrelatedness. I think that's at the core of the theory that really is the challenge. And I think it's both the challenge that Bowen puts out there is to be able to understand the system. And I think it's the way I have been able to practice it in real life. In my own family, I'm significantly less objective than I am when I'm sitting across from a clinical family, which I'm not in their family. I can see it differently, but it creates that respect that, I think that Mariana said at the beginning around, this is hard work. But I think for me, I've experienced as being pretty important work.
But then the importance of theory, because if you trust, if you will, if you have confidence that this has some value, then it can take you the step forward that you need to make. Just a few months ago, my maternal uncle died. And I said, okay, the theory says just relate to the family right on those moments where the system is more flexible and all that. So I couldn't travel, but I'm going to give a call to my aunt and my cousins. Well, it took me a month. It took me a month to make that call. And all I can say is that it had to do with the triangles that you are thinking of. What is my mother going to think about me when I'm calling? Is it going to please her or not? Or is it going to push me to then call everybody else? And I don't want to call everybody else. I just want to call one or two. And all sorts of things that demands from the emotional system that came alive for me just by thinking to call these people who had lost their fathers. So just very interesting how testing it for self gives you respect for what others are going through. And again, the fact that this is not easy work. If Dr. Bowen took 12 years, well,
right.
A month calling my my aunt wasn't bad, I guess.
There you go.
There's a great quote from Kathleen Smith's Everything Isn't Terrible. She says, I truly believe that working on yourself and your family makes the biggest difference in your anxiety level. When Olympic athletes train at higher altitudes, they are faster and stronger when they compete. Your family is high altitude training for anxiety. If you can be calmer in your family, you can do it anywhere.
There you go. Thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely it gives you the best. How they say buck for your
Bang for your
buck.
Yes.
For your buck. That's work on
Yeah.
your own with your family of origin, and that's where you'll get most traction.
And is that because it's so, like I said, it's like 45 years I've swam in this water. And if I can begin to shift things there, I mean, is that part of it just because it's so ingrained, or is there how else might you think of it?
Someone said what is created in relationships is solved in relationships, right? And all this is created in relationship. How we react, how we think, how we what our sensitivities are, what matters to us, all that is created in relationships.
How our physiology gets organized. I think we know more about all of that. That all is occurring within relationship.
So that's why many things that are very useful, meditation and yoga and self-help books and all that, of course, that is very, very important, exercise. But I think the piece that is often missed is the actual relationship with others and exercising that in the face of somebody that is important to you. I mean, I can be pretty calm with a teller at the store, and if she gets upset, I mean, who cares? I'm out of there. But if my sister gets upset, then I'm into something. That really demands much more from me. So yeah, it's where really the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
I was thinking, we're just coming out of, well, I guess it's been a month now, but out of Christmas and then Thanksgiving before that. And my Instagram feed just lights up with these memes about what a problem my parents are or our family members. And I'm going straight to therapy to complain about my family. And actually back to Kathleen Smith, she says, we think that our families are factories that churn out anxiety, but the truth is they're built to reduce anxiety and to, just think about what can I do? I'm part of a family that's filled with other humans that are struggling away as well. And shifting that perspective to everyone else needs to smarten up versus what can I do in the middle of this?
That was my takeaway. I heard this quote that Dr. Bowen used to throw out apparently to the postgraduate program attendees, which was, what does it take? I think, people talk about him banging on the table. What does it take an individual to get interested about themselves or to get curious about themselves? And I think this idea that we've talked about today of working about self in the family is, I was thinking about, what does it take one to get interested, and then decide what responsibility they want to take on. Because I do think when you begin to take on doing work on differentiation in your own family, there is a way that you are saying there's some part I'm going to be responsible for in these relationships. And what is that going to look like? And, what comes back at me? What am I going to do with that? So that was my takeaway is, just this curiosity of, how do you begin to get curious about how your family relationships impact you and vice versa, and what you want to do with that? That was my takeaway. Mariana, did you have a takeaway that you were throwing out there?
Not another one, but just to elaborate on what you're saying, and see that. No, I lost my train of thought. So, Dixie.
Yeah.
I know what I was gonna.
Well, my takeaway was three books that I have found helpful. Actually, the first one is Growing Yourself Up by Jenny Brown, which when I first read it, which would be maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I emailed my counselor who suggested it to me, and I'm like, such a great book. I read it on the airplane ride. And she said, did you answer any of the questions? And I said, no. She's like, go back and read it and think about those questions. So Growing Yourself Up by Jenny Brown, Everything Isn't Terrible by Kathleen Smith, which really goes around to different areas of life, work, family, internet, dating, all sorts of things. And then Family Ties That Bind by Ron Richardson, who, brought Bowen theory, essentially brought living systems to being. I read that again very recently, and just really, really great examples to think through what am I going to do in my family? So, yeah. Good. Well, anything anyone wants to add? I mean, you've got it.
Summaries.
You've got it figured out, right, Mariana? Like,
focus on yourself and stop looking at everybody else. Just focus on yourself, and that'll take you further than anything else.
That's a good challenge to throw out there, Mariana. What does that take to just focus on yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Mariana. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in. I hope today's episode, you take away some questions or ideas to keep thinking as you go out into your relationship. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.